Everything you need to know about the Vigo Dem Party. So sit back, relax, and watch from anywhere. Get ready for a chat with a chair.
I'm Joe Etling, Chair of the Vigo County Democratic Central Party, and welcome to this special edition of Chat with the Chair. We are at Holman Field for the ribbon cutting of the Willa Brown Experience. And we have had a great opportunity to come out here and take in a tremendous event for the city of Terre Haute, for a great history lesson for all of us and a great example for everybody in our community. We've got a great experience to unveil for you later, as well as many guests to talk to. So sit down, enjoy our chat this evening, and we'll be back with you later.
The great mayor of the great city of Terre Haute, Mayor Duke Bennett, who was so supportive of this, and I had him at, I'm Crystal.
That's a hard act to follow there. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for coming out. I mean, this is pretty tremendous. I would include myself in the group that didn't know much about Willa, as more pieces of information came forward, and then when we put this proclamation together, it's kind of like, wow, what a person, what a woman. And I can't believe that we all didn't know about her accomplishments, but I put it in the form of a proclamation today to make it official on behalf of the city of Terre Haute that I would like to read. Whereas Willa Beatrice Brown was born in Glasgow, Kentucky in 1906 to Eric and Hallie Brown, and the family moved to Terre Haute in 1918 seeking better opportunities. And whereas Willa Beatrice Brown was an aviatrix, activist, lobbyist, mechanic, pioneer, politician, and visionary. And whereas Miss Brown was a woman of firsts, the first African American woman to earn a pilot's license, private pilot's license, a commercial pilot's license, and an aircraft mechanic's license in the United States. And whereas she was also the first African American female officer, a lieutenant, and coordinator in the Chicago branch of the U.S. Civil Air Patrol, coordinator of 2 Civil Aeronautics Administration programs, and first to co-own and operate a private Black Flight Academy. And whereas in the 1940s and 50s, this maverick was the first African American woman to run for United States Congress, as she ran 3 different times. And whereas she was educated in the schools of Terre Haute, Indiana, at Sarah Scott and Wiley High School, then graduated with a teaching license from Indiana State Normal School in 1927. And whereas this accomplishment launched her destiny as a lifelong educator who mentored a wide range of individuals, regardless of race or creed, including the renowned Tuskegee Airmen. And whereas the city of Terre Haute and Terre Haute Regional Airport salute Willa Beatrice Brown, a singular hometown heroine and a national treasure. Now therefore I, Duke A. Bennett, Mayor of the City of Terre Haute, do hereby proclaim March 25th, 2022 as Willa Beatrice Brown Day in Terre Haute, and ask all of our citizens to join me in honoring this remarkable woman of firsts. Yeah, tighten up there. There we go. Get us all, Joe. Yep. There we go.
There's a lot of people here.
A little bit. Not like I get it. Okay. Just count you down here in a second. Count you down, okay? Everybody ready? Everybody smile. All right. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, we have a couple people from your family come unveil the
There it goes.
Pull back from the center. From the center, yep.
Where's the drummer at?
Just let them hold it back to the side. All right. Go for it.
We just want to say thank you to everyone. This is an unimaginable honor, as is being related to her. When I was a child, I didn't know exactly who Aunt Willa was to everyone else. We would go to Chicago, visit. I would look at her trinkets. I would look and not touch, for the most part. And that's who I knew her to be, just, you know, a kind relative. I knew she was my grandmother's aunt, and I knew that Corky, I eventually learned that Corky was her nephew. I didn't know why Corky could call my grandparents by the first name. He was almost our age, I felt so, but I understand that Corky is the closest living relative, and it is such an honor that he passed this over to us. But we do want to say thank you, and just a quick story. When I was at I was a sophomore at Purdue. Sorry, I stayed. I even wore my Purdue earrings just to keep them close. But when I was a sophomore, she passed away, and we went to her service, and I was reading the back of the obituary, and that's when I learned that she was a pilot. I had all these questions that I wanted to ask, but it was too late. Thankfully, Google is there for us all. I will warn you, with the last name Brown, you'll end up looking at paints and redecorating your house. Stay focused. Stay focused, and you can learn so much about her. Just an absolute wonderful person. And Cousin Jenny is going to finish us up here. Joy, we have twins. Look, we have twins, and I'm looking at one and saying the other. Joy.
Yes, I am Joy Murph, and I used to correspond quite a bit with Aunt Willa with a desire to one day have events like this that we could tell her story and that she could continue to get the recognition that we as a family believe that she had earned. Eventually, the government felt the same way in 2014, I believe it was, that she received the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor through the Civil Air Patrol, and it was nearly as great as what she wanted, but she always wanted that hometown effect. We were raised as a family. Her father was a minister, and her mother was very intent on educating her children. And so we were raised with the motto of our faith, our family, and our country. And it was often asked by Aunt Willa when we were growing up was, okay, now what are you going to do for your faith, your family, and your country when you grow up? And it was always, okay, Aunt Willa's visiting, get prepared for that question. So we have a little bit of that as a legacy. I'm happy and sad to say that my grandson was supposed to be here today, but he became ill. I think it was a jitters. He studied all night for a test and had it this morning. He's attending ISU.
Yay!
He's majoring in chemistry. He's in the honors program, and he's on the dean's list. So I didn't beat him up too hard. But he is the only one since Aunt Willa that has attended ISU. But we're still proud of that fact that our children have attended many of the state universities, and that we are proud that her hometown is giving her this recognition, and we are extremely pleased that you would allow us to share the celebration with you. Yes, sir.
One word to describe it. 1 word.
One word.
Yeah.
I think it is on the video that she was rather flamboyant. She was also quiet spoken.
Yeah.
So she was a strong force in a little body.
Good.
And I you know what you said, describe her. One of my favorite articles that I ran across, I actually printed a portion of it out. It was, she was interviewed, and so I will skip that, I'll skip that, I'll pull out this. It really is short.
No, you take your time. Take your
It
time.
describes her, so I don't know if you've noticed, I did inherit the nose, which I was not proud of growing up, but now just looking at, you know, how stunning she is, I can I can wear it with pride. This article, it's in the Aviation magazine, and it painted a clearer picture of Willa Brown, the person, and it reads as follows. When Willa Brown, a young woman wearing white joggers, jacket and boots, strode into our newsroom in 1936, she made such a stunning appearance that all the typewriters, which had been clacking noisily, suddenly went silent. Unlike most first-time visitors, she wasn't at all bewildered. She had a confident bearing, and there was an undercurrent of determination in her voice. "I want to speak to Mr. Enoch Waters," she said. I wasn't unhappy at the prospect of discovering who she was and what she wanted. I had an idea she was a model representing a new commercial product that she had been hired to promote. "I am Willa Brown," she informed me, seating herself without being asked. There's one. In a business-like manner, she explained that she was an aviatrix and wanted some publicity for a Negro air show at Harlem Airport in the city's southwest side, on the city's southwest side. Except for the colorful Colonel Hubert Fauntleroy Julian, who called himself Black Eagle, and Colonel John Robinson, I was unaware of any other Negro aviators, particularly in Chicago. "There are about 30 of us," she informed me, "both men and women. Most were students," she added, "but several had obtained their licenses, and one, Cornelius Coffey, was an expert aviation and engineer mechanic who also held a commercial pilot's license and was a certified flight instructor. He was the leader of the group," she informed me, that she held a limited commercial pilot's license, Association of America, the first black aviators group in 1940 after receiving her pilot's license. Fascinated by both her and the idea of Negro aviators, I decided to follow up the story myself. Accompanied by a photographer, I covered the air show. About 200 or 300 other spectators attended, attracted by the story in the Defender. So happy was Willa over our appearance that she offered to take me up for a free ride. She was piloting a Piper Club, which seemed to me, accustomed as I was to commercial planes, to be a rather frail craft. It was a thrilling experience, and the maneuvers, figure eights, flipovers, and stalls were exhilarating, though momentarily frightening. I wasn't convinced of her competence until we landed smoothly.
On a footnote, the plane was hers.
As I looked down, it was like a storm. All those bullets were coming after me.
I felt the two thumps, and the cockpit started filling with smoke, and the airplane, it actually broke in two. And I figured it was time for me to pull the ripcord.
Fire came up out of the floor, right in front of the stick. And I remember the tail going by. I could see the rivets.
I pulled up in the blind spot, put the sight on him, and just follow it. Boom.
On December 7th, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, sweeping the United States into war.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
By mid-1942, Japan had conquered most of Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Nazi Germany had overrun most of Europe. Hitler invaded Russia, hammered Britain, and pushed into North Africa. his regime began the systematic slaughter of millions of people, attempting to create a master race. But America wrestled with its own principles. Despite the statement in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal, the United States had long permitted human beings to own other human beings. Slavery had been abolished for 75 years, but even in the 1940s, racial violence against African Americans was still a brutal fact of life.
Segregation was prevalent throughout, and especially in the South. We knew our place. We knew that we had to abide by the laws.
Despite pioneering African American pilots like Bessie Coleman and Eugene Bullard, in 1940, the number of African American aviators in the U.S. Armed Forces was still 0.
The Air Corps was not accepting any type of application. Their attitude was that the Negro had neither the physiological or psychological capabilities to operate complicated equipment like an airplane.
But 1940 was an election year. To keep the African American vote, President Franklin D. Roosevelt promised that African American soldiers would be trained as military pilots.
Almost every American could come to Tuskegee and see what's been done.
On July 19, 1941, 13 young men reported for training in Tuskegee, Alabama. Their goal? To become the first African American pilots in the United States Armed Forces. Fighter pilots. Tuskegee had been a logical place to train the pilots. It was a secluded location with good weather year-round. Tuskegee Institute's civilian pilot training program had some of the highest scores in the nation. But the surrounding area was racially hostile.
The Ku Klux Klan was very powerful in the Tuskegee area, and the sheriff was a very, very bigoted individual who worked very hard to arrest the blacks for any infraction whatsoever.
If anything happened, you were always wrong, and there was no place to turn, so you had to be pretty careful where you went, and how you acted.
To be told you can't go here, you can't live there, you can't go into the Five and Dime and get a Coke, it was hard for me.
It was a shock to realize how deep it went. You look in the faces of some of those Southern whites, in your eyes, just to see the hatred that some of them had for us.
In Tuskegee, 2 airfields were hurried to completion. Moton Field for primary flight training, and Tuskegee Army Airfield for basic and advanced flight training. The new airfields were almost entirely African American, but the base officers were almost all white. Frederick von Kimball, commanding officer at Tuskegee Army Airfield, wrote, "Negroes do not have the necessary temperament for leadership to fit them for superior positions." On March 7, 1942, the first class completed their basic and advanced pilot training, becoming the first African American pilots in the U.S. military. But only 5 of 13 advanced. In December 1942, Tuskegee Army Airfield got a new commanding officer.
We were fortunate enough to have a white colonel named Noel Parrish, who was open-minded and was willing to make the program that he was put in charge of work.
Colonel Parrish, he was somewhat of an enlightened Kentuckian who was familiar with the race situation and understood it. So he's more sensitive, and he treated everyone basically as individuals.
All of them? Yup. Colonel's orders. Well, what do you know? Things sure are changing around here. Well, it's about time if you're asking me. Right.
Gentlemen, I know the town of Tuskegee is not one where you can feel particularly welcome, but I hope to at least make conditions better on base.
I've had them tell me how they feel about Noel, and I'm almost in tears.
One of the fellows said, there are two men in my life who have made my life what it is and directed me in the right area. One was my father. The other was Noel Parrish.
And don't be surprised if I go up for a check ride with you.
In the spring of 1943, the first group of African-American pilots, the 99th Fighter Squadron, deployed to North Africa. Their commanding officer was Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. The son of an Army general, Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. had been the only African-American in his class at West Point.
And they put on him what they call a silence treatment. We'll talk to you in a classroom setting. But the moment you walked out of that door, nobody would speak to you.
What he suffered there, and I experienced it there, the kind of discipline that he had, this guy was like iron.
Benjamin O. Davis, the commander of the 99th and later the 332nd, he was a man of high standards and yet very human in being able to understand the human weaknesses.
When the Allies invaded Sicily in July 1943, the 99th provided critical air support, earning a Distinguished Unit citation. But another enemy was gathering forces against the Tuskegee Airmen. A white colonel named William Spike Momeyer claimed that the 99th Fighter Squadron showed a lack of aggressive spirit.
90 days after they got into combat, after the 99th got into combat, he recommended that it be taken out of combat. Spike Momeyer's recommendation was ratified all the way up the chain of command to the commanding general of the Army Air Forces, Hap Arnold.
High Command was recommending that no more African-American pilots be sent overseas.
Double Victory was a campaign to defeat the Germans and Japanese in World War II. And if we were successful in doing that, it would also be that we would defeat prejudice in the United States.
To win a double victory, the airmen first had to win the right to fight. Their defense fell to their commanding officer, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. In Washington, Colonel Davis pointed out that the squadron met enemy fighters on 80% of their missions, and that his men often flew 3 to 6 missions a day.
Our squadron is comprised of 26 pilots versus your typical 30 to 35 pilots per squadron.
Benjamin Davis, Jr. got a chance to testify before that board. And every fact that Momeyer put up to take the unit out of combat, he refuted.
And if I may add very frankly, if all the effort invested in the 99th Squadron has produced only a mediocre outfit, then there's no hope. But the 99th is not mediocre.
Well, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Davis. That was very succinct, and I appreciate your candor.
The matter was dropped. The Tuskegee Airmen would be in the war for the duration. In January 1944, a massive German strike force hit the Allied position at Anzio. The 99th Fighter Squadron raced to the defense. Clarence Jameson led a formation of 16 fighters.
The controller called me on the radio. Foxtrot leader, we had 22 bogies at 20,000 feet. I maneuvered around down his tail, but my gun jammed and stopped firing. But the rest of my guys were in perfect position, so we got 7 planes in that one day. And that was the best day we had in combat as a squadron.
In 2 days of vicious fighting over Anzio, the 99th racked up the most aerial victories of any squadron, shooting down 13 enemy aircraft.
No more, no longer could that myth that the black man could not fly and fight. They can do extraordinary things. And this they did there on the beaches of Anzio.
Men of the 99th have a brilliant record. Now they take off to aid ground forces advancing on...
By June 1944, the 99th had been in combat for a full year. They'd flown 500 missions, downed 18 enemy planes and lost just 4 men of their own in combat. A magnificent showing, said the head of the Mediterranean Allied Air Force. That July, the 3 new African-American fighter squadrons joined the 99th in Italy and were gathered into a single unit, the 332nd Fighter Group. The commander for the group was Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. The combat was often fierce. There was glory, and there was loss.
We came down on this airport, and my good friend, Jimmy Calhoun, was flying with us, and he was so anxious to get an angle to shoot the plane on the ground, he flew into the ground. That was the first major loss that I experienced.
First got killed in Sicily early on. The engine quit on him, and he crash landed, so I knew him pretty well. And I felt pretty bad about it because I felt I should be there to protect him.
My brother lost his life on his 3rd mission over Austria. And we really didn't get any closure on that because we really don't know what happened to him.
The flyers of the 332nd Fighter Group were based at Ramitelli Airfield in Italy. And they were not alone. For every Tuskegee airman in the air, there were 10 maintenance personnel on the ground supporting it.
We had to have those planes ready to go on the mission in the morning with the guns or bombs if they were canned bombs, fueled up to the hilt so they could fly for 3-4 hours. We guaranteed that.
By the summer of 1944, the Tuskegee Airmen were flying a brand new fighter plane.
We got P-51 Mustangs. Ask an old fighter pilot, what's your favorite aircraft? It's going to be the P-51 Mustang.
Well, the P-51 was one of the most honest aircraft that we flew. It was a stable airplane at most speeds.
The Tuskegee Airmen quickly made their P-51s distinctive.
It was discovered that we had a lot of red paint. So they decided to paint the 332nd Fighter Group's aircraft with red tails.
We agreed when we started getting the D model with the dorsal, paint that tail red. We would paint them, and not only that, but we would take the name, the Red Tails.
The Red Tails under Colonel Davis were a disciplined group.
You got up at 5 o'clock, went in for the briefing. After your briefing, standing at the door was B.O. Davis. Tall, ramrod, looking you dead in the eye as you went out with your chute on your back. Gentlemen, stay with the bombers.
He said unquestionably, our mission is to protect the bombers, not to see how many interceptors we can shoot down. And we are to do whatever is necessary to see that those bombers get safely to their target and back home. And if it meant your sacrifice of your life, that's what you're there for.
Here you are over Germany, and flight engineer hit me on the shoulder. He went like that. And I looked out the window, and there was a P-51, and he was flying extremely close. He was wearing an oxygen mask, which covered almost all of the face. But I could tell that under that oxygen mask, the face was black. And I knew right away that this Mustang was being flown by the all-Negro 332nd Fighter Group. And I looked back at his tail, and sure enough, the tail was painted red. And I signaled to him that we were okay. It was extremely comforting to know what they were doing. They were telling me, they came down to see if I was okay. And they were telling me, we're here. Well, after a few minutes, they left. They went back up to altitude. But some of them were assigned to us to watch us as we went back. Up until that time, I had never spoken to a black more than a few words. That was the beginning of a relationship where I understood that they weren't that much different. You know, they were not those people.
I wanted to thank you for helping us up there.
We were all doing the same thing. Those guys were flying fighter airplanes. They were risking their lives to protect our lives.
Look after the bombs. Stay with the bombs. That's good to know you got our back.
But even as the fighters did well in combat over Europe, African-American crews ran into problems back home. James Warren was a navigator bombardier in the 477th Bombardment Group.
Finally, they moved the group up to Freeman Field, Indiana. But when we got up there, we were confronted again with very discriminatory and segregated position by the command.
By 1944, the War Department prohibited segregation of military facilities. But Group Commander Colonel Robert Selway created 2 officers' clubs at Freeman Field. One for African-American trainees and one for whites. On April 5th, 1945, an organized group of African-American officers deliberately attempted to enter the Forbidden Club.
You can't come in. Why? You belong to the trainees, and the trainees can't come in.
I am a member of the base squadron.
Well, niggers can't come in.
One of their leaders, Roger Terry, shouldered aside an officer who blocked his way.
There were 61 officers who were put under arrest for entering or attempting to enter the officers' club.
They arrested the first group under a letter order, and they arrested 61 of us in 2 days. I was in the first group that was arrested.
Selway soon released most of the officers, but he prepared a statement spelling out which personnel could use which club and ordered everyone at Freeman Field to sign it.
Base Regulation 85-2 identifies the assignments of facilities for all base personnel.
To me, it said, I agree to be segregated and discriminated against. No way was I going to sign this.
There was 101 who refused the order to segregate yourself. I'm one of those 101.
To refuse that direct order of a commanding officer in time of war was a violation of Article of War 64. Maximum punishment was death.
This is a direct order. Sign the regulation.
The arrests at Freeman Field triggered a strong public reaction. Congressmen and senators complained to the War Department. For nearly 2 weeks, the 101 officers were held under arrest. It was like a Nazi prison camp, one man said. Finally, the case reached the top. General George Marshall ordered Selway to release all but 3 of the men. Roger Terry, the only man convicted, suffered a fine, loss of rank, and a dishonorable discharge. As for Selway, he was relieved of his command because he violated Army regulation. The war ended before the 477th Bombardment Group could see action. But at Freeman Field, these airmen too had scored a crucial triumph at home.
Double victories for the Freeman Field Mutiny. That's it. So that's what that's about. Victory at home, victory abroad. And Freeman Field is the victory at home.
In May 1945, Germany surrendered, ending the war in Europe. In 3 years, Tuskegee had trained almost 1,000 pilots and some 15,000 support personnel. They'd flown 1,500 missions overseas. 84 Tuskegee Airmen lost their lives during the war, but they'd created an astounding record of success. In October 1945, the 332nd Fighter Group came home at last to the nation they'd risked their lives for.
We got no ticker tape parade. We got no welcome. You got off the boat and you went and got on a segregated train and you rode it home for your 30 days leave.
When the war ended, with all the experience that we had, pilots and mechanics, we thought that we'd just go downtown and sign up with the airlines. They told me, you know, you fit the bill, but we're not hiring any colored mechanics.
Coming back home, you talking about feeling downhearted? You're darn right. But this was what was going on in the United States of America in 1945. Lynching, all kinds of segregation.
Due in part to the exemplary performance of the Tuskegee Airmen, on July 26, 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, ending segregation in the armed forces. In the country at large, segregation was still the law of the land, but the Tuskegee Airmen had given their people something more than hope.
My experience as a Tuskegee Airman gave me inner strength to get out and join Martin Luther King and walk 53 miles for freedom. Tuskegee Airmen came home and became involved in the struggle at home. And as a result, they changed the condition at home.
The Tuskegee Airmen were men with goals, determination, and the desire to overcome the odds of life, to succeed and be recognized as citizens. Not so much for the glory that it might bring for themselves, but it was the love of this country, in spite of her imperfections.
Dreams come true. The dream to end segregation, the dream to be an aviator, the dream to be a college professor, the dream to be a leader in the community. Those are great things to happen. But the other part of it is the challenge that remains.
Take advantage of that opportunity. You don't pass it up. That's what the Tuskegee Airmen did. When that door opened, they walked through it with their qualifications and their ability to perform.
You don't have to pay your dues, nothing at all. Be easy, you don't have to work at it, but you have the opportunity, and the sky is the limit.
Everything you need to know about the Vigo Dem party. So sit back, relax, and watch from anywhere.